My name is Megan Turner. I'm 31 years old, and I was sitting in a disciplinary hearing with my entire career hanging by a thread because my own family had reported me as a fraud. Not a mistake. Not a misunderstanding. Fraud. My sister stood across the room with a folder pressed to her chest like it was a weapon, and my parents sat behind her with the calm faces of people who believed they had finally found a way to erase me. "She's pretending to be a lawyer," my sister said clearly, making sure every member of the committee heard her. "There is no way she passed the bar. There is no way someone like Megan became an attorney without lying." Nobody laughed. Nobody interrupted. The room was too quiet, and that silence was worse than shouting. I could feel people looking at me like I was already guilty, like the suit I wore, the license number on my file, the years of work behind my name. All of it might collapse under one family's accusation. My parents had signed the complaint. They had attached statements. They had called me unstable, dishonest, attention-seeking, and desperate to look successful. I sat there with my hands folded, because if I reacted the way they expected, they would use that too. Then the presiding judge opened my file. She turned one page, then another. Her expression changed so suddenly that even my sister stopped talking. The judge looked at my name again, looked at me, and for one strange second she seemed to stop breathing. Then she said, "No, I remember her." The room froze. She lowered the file and said, "Best lawyer I've seen." Before I tell you what she remembered, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. The first time I learned that truth did not always matter in my family, I was 14 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with a scholarship application in front of me and a red pen mark across the top. My mother, Patricia Turner, had crossed out half my essay before I even finished reading it to her. My father, Richard Turner, stood by the sink with his arms folded, watching me like my ambition was a stain on the room. My sister, Allison Turner, sat at the counter eating grapes one by one, smiling without showing her teeth. Allison was 2 years older than me, the kind of daughter parents introduced with pride before anyone even asked. She had perfect hair, perfect grades, perfect posture, perfect timing. She knew when to sound humble and when to let people admire her. I was the other daughter, the one who talked too much, questioned too much, worked too slowly, and made my parents sigh before I even opened my mouth. That night, I had written an essay about wanting to become a lawyer because I hated watching powerful people scare ordinary people into silence. My mother read the first paragraph, clicked her tongue, and said, "Megan, this sounds dramatic. You always make yourself the victim." My father added, "Law is for people who can handle pressure. Allison could do something like that. You get emotional over everything." Allison laughed softly and said, "Maybe she can be a paralegal. That still sounds legal." I remember staring at the paper while my face burned, not because they had insulted me, but because a part of me had expected them to do it and still hoped they wouldn't. That was the special cruelty of my family. They did not just refuse to believe in me. They trained me to feel foolish for believing in myself. When report cards came home, Allison's grades were framed as proof of intelligence, while mine were treated like lucky accidents. When I won a debate tournament, my father asked how many people had competed. When I got into a summer legal studies program, my mother said, "Are you sure they didn't accept everyone?" When Allison forgot a deadline, she was overwhelmed. When I worked 3 jobs and missed one family dinner, I was selfish. And slowly, without anyone ever saying it directly, the family rule became clear. Allison's future was an investment, and mine was a risk. By the time I turned 18, I had stopped asking them to clap for me. I worked at a diner before school, stocked shelves after school, and cleaned office buildings on weekends because I wanted money that no one in that house could use to control me. I bought used LSAT books with cracked spines. I listened to free lectures on my phone during bus rides. I wrote personal statements in the break room while my uniform smelled like coffee and bleach. And every time I came home tired, Allison would look up from whatever expensive opportunity my parents had funded that month and say, "You know, working hard isn't the same as being special." She said it like advice. My parents heard it like wisdom. I heard it like a warning. Years later, in that hearing room, when Allison stood in front of a state ethics board and called me a fraud, I realized she was not inventing a new lie. She was simply saying out loud what my family had always believed, that I could not possibly earn anything real unless I had stolen it from someone better. I did not become a lawyer in a clean, inspiring montage. There was no wealthy relative writing checks, no family friend opening doors, no proud parents helping me move into law school with boxes labeled future attorney. I became a lawyer the ugly way. I became one with overdraft fees, secondhand suits, panic attacks in library bathrooms, and a notebook full of case briefs written in the margins because I could not always afford printer paper. I went to a state university first, not because it was my dream school, but because it was the school I could reach without drowning. I studied political science during the day and worked customer service calls at night for a company that sold home warranty plans nobody seemed happy with. Most nights, strangers yelled at me through a headset until midnight, and then I walked back to my apartment and studied constitutional law until my eyes watered. My family called this my little phase. Allison had already entered a polished corporate track by then, working in compliance for a financial services company, where her job title sounded more impressive than the work she actually did. My parents loved saying she was building a serious career. When I told them I wanted to focus on consumer protection law, my father said, "So you want to sue businesses for a living?" My mother said, "That sounds unstable." Allison said, "It sounds very Megan, always fighting for people who can't help her climb." What none of them understood was that I was not trying to climb their ladder. I was building my own. During my second year of law school, I met Professor Daniel Whitmore, a former trial attorney who taught consumer fraud litigation. He was sharp, impatient, and allergic to excuses. The first paper I submitted to him came back covered in comments so brutal, I considered dropping the class. At the bottom, he wrote one sentence: "You think like a lawyer, but you apologize like someone trained not to take up space." I read that sentence at least 20 times. A week later, he called me into his office and asked why my arguments were strong in the middle, but weak at the beginning and end. I told him I didn't know. He said, "Yes, you do. You're afraid to sound certain." I wanted to deny it, but I couldn't. Certainty had been punished out of me at home. Confidence was Allison's territory. I had learned to present my achievements like accidents so no one would accuse me of arrogance. Professor Whitmore saw it immediately. He made me argue cases out loud. He interrupted me every time I softened a point. He forced me to say, "I object," without smiling afterward. He taught me that being kind did not require being small. That changed everything. After graduation, I moved to Chicago and joined a nonprofit consumer protection clinic that helped elderly clients, immigrants, single parents, and working families fight predatory lenders, fake debt collectors, and companies that buried people under contracts they could not understand. The work was not glamorous. My office had flickering lights, a coffee machine older than me, and filing cabinets that jammed if you looked at them wrong. But every week, someone walked in terrified and left with a little more power than they had before. That meant something to me. Then came the Henderson case, the one that would later make the judge in my disciplinary hearing remember my name. It involved a retired school custodian named Mrs. Henderson, who had been tricked into signing a home repair financing contract that ballooned into a lien against the house her late husband had built. The company's lawyers expected me to settle quietly. I didn't. I found forged initials, hidden fees, false notarizations, and a pattern of targeting elderly homeowners. The case went before Judge Evelyn Hartwell. I was 29, exhausted, underpaid, and wearing shoes with worn-down heels. But when I stood in that courtroom, I was not my family's disappointing daughter. I was an attorney, and I knew the record better than everyone else in the room. We won. The ruling forced the company to release Mrs. Henderson's lien and open the door for dozens of other victims to come forward. Judge Hartwell told me after the hearing, "Counselor, that was one of the most disciplined presentations I've seen in this courtroom." I did not tell my family. By then, I had learned that some victories are safer when protected from people who only know how to poison them. The complaint arrived on a Tuesday morning in a certified envelope that looked too official to ignore and too thin to contain a disaster. I was standing beside the copy machine at work when our office manager handed it to me and said, "Megan, this came from the State Attorney Ethics Board." For a second, I thought it was a notice related to one of my cases. Then I opened it, and the room tilted. The complaint alleged that I had misrepresented myself as a licensed attorney, falsified bar admission records, exaggerated client outcomes, and manipulated vulnerable people into believing I had authority I did not possess. It used phrases that sounded legal enough to frighten a stranger and personal enough to wound me. Attached were 3 statements. One from Allison, one from my mother, one from my father. Allison claimed I had always been obsessed with appearing more successful than I was. My mother wrote that I had a history of embellishing achievements for sympathy. My father stated that based on his knowledge of my character, he found it unlikely that I had passed the bar honestly, not impossible, not unsupported, unlikely. That one word almost made me laugh because it was the most honest thing he had ever written about me. He was not saying he had evidence. He was saying my success did not match the version of me he preferred. My supervising attorney, a woman named Claire Bennett, read the complaint twice, then looked at me and said, "This is absurd, but absurd can still damage you if we don't answer it correctly." She was right. In law, reputation is not decoration, it is oxygen. A formal ethics complaint, even a ridiculous one, can scare clients, pause opportunities, and make colleagues whisper. And my family knew that. This was not an emotional outburst, it was targeted. They had chosen the one accusation that could make my entire professional life shake. I later found out why. Allison's company had been connected to a financing vendor I was investigating in a separate consumer fraud matter. I had not known she was involved at first. When my filings began circling closer to that vendor, Allison panicked. Instead of telling the truth, she built a family story around the lie she needed. Megan was unstable. Megan was jealous. Megan was pretending. Megan could not be trusted. My parents, eager to protect the daughter they had always chosen, signed their names beneath it. At the hearing, Allison performed exactly the way she had performed her whole life. She wore a navy suit, carried a leather folder, and spoke in a wounded voice that made cruelty sound like concern. "We didn't want to do this," she told the committee, "but Megan has always struggled with reality when she feels inferior. We were afraid innocent clients could be harmed." I stared at her, amazed by the elegance of it. She was not just accusing me of fraud. She was presenting herself as brave for destroying me. My mother dabbed her eyes. My father looked straight ahead, jaw tight, like a man enduring a necessary sacrifice. Then Allison said, "No one in our family has ever seen proof that she passed the bar." I almost stood up then. Not because the accusation was strong, but because it was stupid. But Claire placed one hand lightly on my sleeve, reminding me to wait. The committee chair asked Allison if she had contacted the state bar database before filing the complaint. Allison hesitated for half a second. We had reason to believe any public record could have been manipulated, she said. That was the moment I understood how far she was willing to go. There is no defense against a person who calls every piece of proof fake before they even see it. Unless, of course, the proof comes from someone they cannot intimidate. When Judge Evelyn Hartwell entered the hearing room, I noticed Allison's posture change. She straightened, smoothed her blazer, and lifted her chin as if status itself had just walked through the door, and she intended to be seen respecting it. My parents did the same thing they always did around powerful people. They became smaller, softer, more agreeable versions of themselves. The judge was not there to preside over a trial in the traditional sense. She had been appointed to chair the disciplinary panel for complex complaints involving alleged fraud by licensed attorneys. She had gray hair cut neatly at her jaw, eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of calm that made nervous people talk too much. Allison talked too much. She repeated that I lacked the background, the temperament, and the credibility to be an attorney. She suggested that my nonprofit work gave me access to vulnerable clients I could exploit. She implied that my case results were probably inflated. Every sentence was wrapped in fake sadness. This is painful for us, she said, but our concern is public safety. Judge Hartwell listened without expression. Then she turned to me. Ms. Turner, your response? I stood slowly. My legs were steady, which surprised me. For years, my family had confused my restraint for weakness, but restraint is not weakness. Sometimes restraint is a blade kept clean until the exact second it is needed. Your Honor, members of the panel, I began. I am a licensed attorney in good standing. My bar number is included in my response packet. My admission certificate, continuing legal education records, employment verification, case docket history, and sworn letters from supervising counsel are also included. Allison made a small sound, almost a laugh. Documents can be produced, she said. That doesn't mean they're legitimate. Judge Hartwell looked at her over the rim of her glasses. Ms. Turner, you will have a chance to respond when asked. Allison's face tightened. I continued. The accusation is not just false, it is reckless. It was submitted by people who did not verify the most basic public facts before attempting to damage my license, my client's trust, and my livelihood. My mother leaned toward my father and whispered something. I didn't look at them. I had spent enough of my life checking their faces for permission to continue. I was done. Claire presented the certified bar records first, then my employment history, then my case list with redacted client information, then letters from attorneys who had worked with me, judges who had observed me, and clients who described what my advocacy had done for their lives. Allison kept shaking her head like disbelief could become evidence if she repeated it long enough. Then the door opened at the back of the room, and Professor Daniel Whitmore walked in. He had flown in that morning after Claire contacted him. I had not wanted to ask him. Some wounded parts of me still hated needing help. But when he stepped forward, placed a sworn statement on the table and said, I taught Ms. Turner, supervised her clinic work, reviewed her bar preparation, and later referred cases to her because I trusted her judgment. Something in my chest loosened. Allison's eyes flickered with recognition, and I saw it immediately. She knew him. Claire saw it too. Ms. Turner, Claire said to Allison, have you met Professor Whitmore before? Allison swallowed. Briefly. Professor Whitmore turned his head slightly. She applied to our Compliance Council Fellowship 3 years ago, he said. I was on the review committee. The room went still. Allison's face changed color. Claire asked, and was she accepted? No, Professor Whitmore said. She was not. He paused, then added, Ms. Megan Turner, however, was offered an interview for that same fellowship and declined because she had already committed to public interest work. My parents looked at Allison. Allison looked at the table, and for the first time that day, the perfect daughter had no perfect answer. That was when the hearing stopped being about whether I was a fraud and started becoming about why my family needed me to look like one. Judge Hartwell leaned back in her chair and studied Allison for a long moment. "You filed a formal disciplinary complaint accusing your sister of falsifying her credentials," she said. "You now acknowledge you did not verify her bar status. You dismissed certified records as potentially fake, and you failed to disclose that you had previously been rejected from a legal fellowship connected to one of Ms. Turner's witnesses. Is that correct?" Allison's mouth opened, but nothing came out. My father shifted in his seat. My mother whispered, "Allison?" Not, "Megan, we're sorry." Not, "What have we done?" Just Allison. Even then, their first instinct was to protect her from the consequences of her own choices. Claire stood again. "Your Honor, there is one more issue." She opened a separate folder, thinner than the others. "During our preparation, we reviewed the metadata on the documents submitted with the complaint. The family statements were not drafted independently. They were created from the same template, on the same device, within the same 2-hour window. The device username appears to be A. Turner Compliance." Allison's head snapped up. "That doesn't prove anything." Claire remained calm. "It proves coordination, but there is more. The vendor currently under investigation in one of Ms. Turner's consumer fraud matters lists you as a compliance consultant on internal correspondence produced in discovery last month. That creates a potential motive to discredit Ms. Turner before her filings advanced." My father stood halfway up. "This is outrageous." Judge Hartwell's voice cut through the room. "Sit down, Mr. Turner." He sat. I had never seen my father obey anyone that quickly. For a strange second, I felt like I was watching gravity return to a room where my family had floated above consequences for years. Allison began speaking quickly, the polished sadness gone from her voice. "I was trying to protect people. Megan has always been unstable. She twists things. She makes everyone feel guilty. You don't know what she's like." Judge Hartwell looked at me. "Ms. Turner, do you wish to respond?" I could have attacked then. I could have told every story, every insult, every birthday forgotten, every achievement minimized, every moment Allison had smiled while my parents cut me down. But I had learned something in courtrooms that my family never understood. The strongest argument is not always the loudest one. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "My family is entitled to dislike me. They are entitled to doubt me privately. They are even entitled to misunderstand my work. But they are not entitled to weaponize an ethics system because my professional obligations became inconvenient for them." Allison's eyes filled with tears, but this time they did not move me. Tears can be grief, but they can also be strategy. I have spent my career representing people whose lives were nearly ruined because someone with more power decided the truth was flexible, I continued. I did not expect to see that same pattern signed by my own parents and submitted against me under oath. My mother began crying for real then, not softly, not beautifully, but with a stunned, embarrassed sound. My father stared at the floor. Allison whispered, "Megan, stop." I turned toward her for the first time. "That's what you've always wanted, isn't it? For me to stop. Stop trying, stop speaking, stop becoming harder to dismiss." She flinched. "But I didn't build this career to impress you," I said. "I built it because people needed someone in the room who would not fold when powerful people lied." Judge Hartwell looked down at my file again, and I saw recognition move across her face before she said anything. She turned one page, then another. Her fingers stopped on the Henderson case. Her voice changed. "Mrs. Eleanor Henderson," she said quietly. "Predatory home repair financing, forged initials, emergency injunction." I felt the entire room tighten around that name. The judge looked at me, And this time, there was no uncertainty in her eyes. "I remember this case," she said. "I remember you." Allison's face went pale. Judge Hartwell closed the file. "Best lawyer I've seen in this room in years. Not because you were the loudest, because you were prepared, precise, and unwilling to let a frightened woman lose her home to a lie." No one spoke. My sister had brought me there to expose me. Instead, the judge remembered the exact case that proved who I was. The panel deliberated for 27 minutes. I know because I watched the clock the entire time, not out of fear, but because every minute felt like a door closing behind the old version of me. My parents sat 3 rows back, silent now. Allison kept scrolling through her phone with trembling fingers, probably looking for a message, a loophole, a rescue. No one came. When Judge Hartwell returned, everyone stood. Allison tried to compose her face, but panic had already broken through. The judge sat, opened the file, and spoke with the kind of clarity that leaves no room for fantasy. After reviewing the certified records, sworn testimony, employment verification, case history, and the credibility of the statements presented today, this panel finds no basis whatsoever to proceed against Ms. Megan Turner. I heard my mother inhale sharply. The judge continued. "The complaint is dismissed in full. Ms. Turner's license remains in good standing. There will be no disciplinary action against her." For 1 second I closed my eyes, not long enough to cry, just long enough to feel the ground beneath me again. Then Judge Hartwell's voice hardened. "However, this panel is deeply concerned by the conduct of the complainants. A disciplinary system exists to protect the public, not to settle family resentments, conceal conflicts of interest, or damage an attorney whose work may be inconvenient to outside parties." Allison whispered, "No." Judge Hartwell looked directly at her. "The matter of potentially false or reckless statements submitted to this board will be referred for further review. Any professional conflict connected to the vendor under investigation should be disclosed to the appropriate authorities immediately." My father stood again, but this time he looked old. "Your Honor, please. This is a family matter." Judge Hartwell's expression did not change. "You made it a professional matter when you signed a formal complaint." That sentence landed harder than any shout could have. My mother covered her mouth. Allison's face drained of all color. The same people who had walked in expecting to watch me beg were now watching the system they tried to misuse turn toward them. Claire gathered our documents calmly, but Professor Whitmore gave me the smallest nod, the kind that said, "Stand up straight. This part matters too." Judge Hartwell addressed me once more. "Ms. Turner, the panel recognizes the seriousness of what you endured today. You handled yourself with restraint and professionalism." I nodded because I could not trust my voice yet. Then the hearing was adjourned. The gavel struck once, and just like that, the accusation that was supposed to ruin me became the record that cleared me. Outside the room, my mother reached for my arm. "Megan, wait." For most of my life, that voice could stop me instantly. That day, it didn't. I turned slowly. My father stood behind her, stiff and ashamed. Allison stayed near the wall, eyes red, jaw clenched, still more angry than sorry. My mother said, "We didn't understand. Allison told us." I almost smiled. Even her apology began with Allison. "You signed it," I said. My father swallowed. "We thought we were protecting the family." "No," I said. "You were protecting the version of the family where I stayed beneath her." Allison snapped, "Don't act innocent. You loved this. You loved embarrassing me." I looked at her, and for once I did not see the golden child. I saw a frightened woman who had confused being favored with being untouchable. "You embarrassed yourself," I said. "I just stopped covering for you." My mother started crying again. "Can we talk about this at home?" That word almost made me laugh. Home. The place where my dreams were questioned before strangers ever got the chance. The place where my confidence had to whisper. The place where Allison's comfort mattered more than my truth. I don't have a home with people who tried to take my name from me, I said. My father's face twisted. Megan, were your parents? I nodded. That used to be the reason I kept giving you chances. Today, it's the reason I'm done. Then I walked away. Not dramatically. Not running. Not shaking, just walking. Behind me, my mother called my name once, then twice. Allison said something sharp, probably blaming everyone but herself. My father did not speak. Maybe he finally understood that silence, the weapon he had used against me for years, could also be the sound of someone leaving forever. In the weeks that followed, the consequences unfolded quietly but completely. Allison's company placed her on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation into her outside consulting relationship. The vendor she had tried to protect became the subject of a wider inquiry. My parents sent messages that began with excuses, shifted into guilt, and eventually collapsed into apologies when they realized I was not answering. My mother wrote, "We made a mistake." My father wrote, "You have to understand how this looked to us." I deleted both messages because I finally understood something. An apology that still asks you to understand the person who hurt you is not accountability. It is negotiation. As for me, I went back to work. Mrs. Henderson sent flowers when she heard what happened, with a card that said, "Some people protect houses. Some people protect dignity. You did both." I kept that card on my desk, not because I needed proof anymore, but because it reminded me whose opinion actually mattered. I did not win because the judge praised me. I did not win because my sister was exposed. I won because I refused to let people who never believed in me become the authors of my life. There are families who love you loudly, and there are families who only love the role they assign to you. If you outgrow that role, they may call it betrayal, they may call it arrogance, they may even call it fraud. But growth is not a crime. Becoming strong is not a crime. Leaving people who shrink you is not a crime. The greatest revenge is not always destroying the people who hurt you. Sometimes the greatest revenge is standing in the room they built to humiliate you and letting the truth speak so clearly that even their lies feel ashamed. If you are watching this and someone in your life keeps questioning your worth, your intelligence, your talent, or your future, remember this. You do not need their permission to become undeniable. You do not need applause from people committed to misunderstanding you. And you do not have to keep a seat open in your life for anyone who only shows up to watch you fail. So tell me honestly, if your own family tried to ruin your name in public, would you forgive them? Or would you walk away for good? Comment below. I want to hear what you would do.
My team and I are always trying to create stories that are dramatic, emotional, and powerful enough to leave a message behind. Please remember that the story is completely fictional, created to entertain, inspire reflection, and share meaningful lessons about family, betrayal, justice, and knowing your own worth.